I thought I was gonna start right away on the fuselage here. I just ready to start covering on it. I had my granddaughter go over it with a wet rag the other day and clean up all the dust and stuff that had accumulated on it over the last few months since the last time I did that. And I was figuring on going over it with some paint thinner. I've used a lot of peralkatone on things on this thing, all the moving parts and stationary parts that stick through and whatnot, the fittings and fasteners and whatnot. So that's dripped all over the place. I've cleaned it up a couple of times, or got it pretty much cleaned up, but I was going to go over everything again and make sure I had it all cleaned up before I started putting the fabric on, then go over it with the MAK to get everything clean and ready to glue the fabric on it. But I decided to do a couple of other things first. One of the things was this aileron cable hookup there. That's where the torque tube is, right there, where it sticks through the bottom of the fuselage, or the bottom of the floorboards, and the aileron cables hook onto that and then go out through the bottom of the fuselage there. Well, this is it right here. See, that's the torque tube, moves back and forth to control the ailerons. This is a link here. It's pretty simple construction. It's just a couple of pieces of, well, it was flat steel. And those were pretty rough shape. They were pretty rusted up, so we've got a new link there made out of stainless steel. And I've made up new just blank control cables here. I just put one end on them. But because the fuselage is 4 inches wider than the standard fuselage, these control cables either need to be remade into new ones, or the link needed to be lengthened out. So I made up new control cables to go through there, and I use stainless steel control cables because they're on salt water anyway, and they wear out. I think we just changed these a couple of years ago, but just to be sure, we'll go ahead and change them out again. So that's the new link right there, and the cables attached to it. They're just couple of AN3. I got -5 bolts in there, castellated nuts, and we'll put cotter pins in there, and those will be done. The old fuselage, they just had a 5 and whatever inch handhole cover, inspection cover on here. Some of them I've seen pictures of. They'll put 2, one on each side of here to get access to that. I have a hard time getting my hands in those to work on anything. I was thinking about leaving these until we got the airplane all covered and ready to put together to put those in, but I decided I might as well put them in now. That way we can cover over it and don't have to worry about it. I got a square one like we use on the tail. It'll have more room to get in there to work on this. So I can go ahead and put that all on there and just leave it closed up for now, and then we can open it up when we need to, instead of having it cut open in a place for moisture and stuff to get in there. I'm just going to hang these cables up in here inside the fuselage for now while we continue to work on the airplane, while we put the cover on it. And okay, those are all tied in there, nuts, cotter pins, that's all done. So this is the cable bundle. It has the battery cable that runs to the starter, the cables that run from the alternator to the battery, and the solenoids and whatnot, as well as the push-to-talk switch. I've got it tied in pretty good with a couple of cable clamps, but there's enough push on this cable, enough stress on this cable, that it does push out a little bit. And I've pushed it in and held it in, but it just the natural tension in it can pull it back out again. So like I say, I've got 2 cable clamps on it already. I'm going to put another cable clamp right here in the middle of this bend, as that fabric goes right against this channel right here, and it's pretty tight across here, so it's a chance of that bundle coming out and contacting the fabric there. So anyway, I'm going to eliminate any problem that might cause. I'll go ahead and drill another hole through the floorboards there and screw that down like I did the other side, or the other 2. Alright, that'll keep that cable bundle up there where it won't hang down into the fabric. It'll get good clearance there, 1/2 inch, 3/4 of an inch of clearance between this bundle and the fabric now. Now, the other thing I need to do before I cover this has to do with this baggage compartment. This is all aluminum sheet. Some of it has been bent. I've got forms on it from the beating machine, some beads in it and stuff, so they're a little tighter, but some of them are just flat pieces, and they're kind of tinny, and they can make a lot of noise when you're flying, airplane vibration and stuff. I bought some foam to glue on those to help dampen the vibrations on there and quiet them down, and I need to get that glued on there before we put the fabric on. So I need to wipe that metal down, make sure it's good and clean, so I'll get some acrylic clean and wipe the surfaces down with it. And I've got this Super 77 contact adhesive. I'll just cut out some chunks of this, and it doesn't have to be pretty. Nobody will ever see it again until they go to rebuild this airplane again. So it's going to be on the outside of the metal and the inside of the fabric, but I'll glue some pieces of this on to different spots on that metal on that baggage compartment so we can keep it from making so much noise. I glued this foam on here with contact adhesive. I've got a piece here on this flat back panel, another one underneath there on the big panel that's in the back of the lower baggage compartment. Then I put some on these top panels up here that aren't beaded. I had a couple left over I put on the beaded panels on the other side there, the long ones. These ones here don't seem to flex very much at all, but I don't really see where they're doing anything. This still oil cans and makes noise, but maybe it'll stop the noise from just the vibration when you're flying in the airplane. I don't know. One last thing I think to do before I start putting the fabric on. When I put that jack screw together, the stabilizer trim, I had a bushing put in there to put a zert in it in the top bushing because they get froze up sometimes. And after looking at it, that jack screw itself, the top of it is drilled out, so it's a chamber, a hollow, down almost an inch. And then of course the bushing itself, the metal bushing that's welded onto the fuselage, is quite a bit deeper than that. It's a couple inches deep. Like I said, I put a zert on there for greasing it, but I got to looking at that and thought maybe if I put oil in that cup in the top of that jack screw, it would seep out into that bushing and help lubricate it to keep it from freezing up. So I drilled a 1/16 inch hole through the side of that cup on the top of that jack screw, and then I figured I would put these pieces of felt in there to soak up oil, to hold oil, and then I could fill that chamber up with oil, and it would just gradually seep down in through that hole. It would wick through the felt. Well, I put two pieces of felt in there, and these are the diameter of these, or the inside diameter of that big bushing, and I didn't have anything down in the top of that jack screw itself, or the screw itself. So I thought I would go ahead and cut a bushing and stuff down in there, and so that could then be saturated with oil, and that would just gradually, like I said, weep out through that little hole and help lubricate that top bushing in that jack screw. So this is just a piece of felt. This is a felt insole from a boot, a rubber boot. You get them for hip waders or winter boots or rubber boots, whatever. That's about the only access to felt that I have here. Oh, I need to put the handle in that. There we go. And I think I only need one in there of these smaller diameter ones to get down in that jack screw. And then I'll put these two back in, the main bushing. Oh, this is the jack screw assembly, the yoke, and of course the jack screw, or the stabilizer adjustment screw, as it's called in the book, in the link. So here's that upper bushing. And you'd see the zert that I had welded on there. I could get on that and grease that every once in a while. But in there is the felt, and I've saturated those with some Marvel Mystery Oil that I had. And that little plug that I made fit right down into the top of that jack screw, in that cavity in the jack screw, and then there's two of those pieces of felt in there, and that leaves just enough of a cavity at the top that it can act as a reservoir for oil when you pump it in there, so it just seeps down through those felts and gets absorbed in them. If it had been flush with the top, then oil would go all over the place as you tried to put oil in that felt. Really sad that there's nothing down here on this lower bushing to lubricate it. It just depends on oil coming down and grease coming down off of this. There's really no way to oil that. Like I've said this probably a dozen times before, but these two bushings should have been larger diameter OD so that you could put a bronze bushing or something in there instead of having a steel on steel. That would have made a lot of difference on that. We'll be working around both sides of the airframe there and doing quite a bit back along the tail, the fuselage and stuff. I'll have to turn the fuselage both ways pretty good. I wanted a little bit more room in here in the basement to pull that thing out so I can get around the tail. I built that powder coat oven to powder coat the torque tube and the instrument panel and anything else that comes up that I might eventually need to powder coat that's too big to fit in a regular kitchen oven. Since I built it, I haven't really done any work much on the tail that I couldn't do just around in the tight spot that it's backed into there. Most of the work was done on the front end and we're in the pilot seat forward, basically, doing the instruments and stuff like that. So I didn't need to pull the airframe out any, but I want to be able to do it now to be able to get around it for this fabric work. So I pulled the oven out of here. Now I've got a lot more room to move this fuselage around in here. And I will need that room anyway when we get done with the fabric on here and get ready to move this down to the hangar. I'll need that room anyway to be able to move the airplane out of here. So doing the fabric work on these tail control surfaces, I used this workbench and laid them out on it. And I laid all my supplies out on these two little tables there, the one Chicago Electric Harbor Freight welding table that I just got, and a workmate table that we've got. I've got all my tapes, poly brush and poly tack, brushes, scissors, razor blades, things like that on that one table, and I've got my irons, my needles and thread, and clean rags and pinking shears over there on the workmate table. And that worked out fine. Everything was handy right there. I could keep it real close to where I was working. I just have to reach over and grab it. I've got a little Napa roll-around stool to roll back and forth with here when I was working on like the leading edges and the trailing edge, things that I moved around a lot on. I just sit on the stool and work back and forth across the bench with it. Now that I'm going to be working on the airframe and doing the skin on it, it's over there a ways. It's not going to be quite so handy. So I went over to the hangar and got this little rollaway cart. So my wife bought that for me several years ago for the hangar. So I went down, got it, and drug it up here to the basement. And I'll use it to lay out my fabric and scissors and things like that I need to keep handy, and that way I can just roll it around where I need it. Well, anyway, it's time to get started at this stuff. I've got my workspace here cleaned up, opened up now. Now we can get started.